Hi, this is Dr. Susan Swem, Executive Director of Now I See a Person Institute, and we are so happy to be here today. We have um, some very important people who are all working together to create some new learning projects within Now I See a Person Institute and adding them to assistant faculty positions. They're just so important in a lot of the work that we're doing right now and in teaching people about the idea that healing is possible for all people. So right now we have one of our colleagues, her name is Margaret, and a colleague named Ashley, and we have a baby with us today too. That's going to be in the background, and he's very happy to be here as well. So one of the things that we were talking about earlier, and I really do think that having the inclusion of a baby in our podcast, really represents what we do because we try to be very inclusive of all voices. And so it's very normal when we have been having clients in the past that they bring children and their voices are part of the conversation. And so I really am happy that we are able to have some conversations with that include the voices of very, very small children today. So we were talking about, I think, a lack of inclusion today. We're talking about thoughts of guilt, maybe thoughts of remorse, maybe thoughts that we should be doing things differently. And I don't think that those are just thoughts that we are talking about today, but we were thinking that these are thoughts that permeate society. And in this conversation today, we have people of many different generations. So, of course, myself being the oldest generation here, and then next Margaret, and then next Ashley, and then our baby who's present with us has been here the least amount of time. And, in our type of work, we don't, at Now I See a Person Institute, we don't focus on what's wrong with people or trying to uncover what Lynn Hoffman a long time talked about, was calling that thing in the bushes. So that thing in the bushes represented that if someone is suffering and someone has trauma, then we can find what needs to happen to them, how they can heal. And coming from a philosophy of social constructionism, we feel that there's many possibilities for people to heal. There's many conversations that can take place where people surpass even high acuity types of things. We have seen it time and time again for the last 4 decades. And that in our mind, everybody has the capacity to heal. And how do we form our community with other people's community that healing can take place? And when we always are talking about the type of, maybe a little bit of the type of way that we participate, is that we participate very much in a not knowing position. So we don't assume that we know what is best for each person in any of our interactions with people. And we're intentionally curious to find out from them what is happening, that they want to be in conversations to alleviate some of the suffering that's going on at that point in time. And through these conversations, the not yet said happens. And the not yet says is those boundless opportunities to find what is going to help. That it's not just one theoretical orientation that's going to make somebody better, or one technique from one theory, or one medication, or one diagnosis. That people are so much more complex. And so we can't find that needle in the haystack, but we can journey with our clients, whether those be clients from a clinical standpoint or clients from a coaching and wellness consulting standpoint. That that we establish relationships where we have the time to talk and we care. As one client said a very long time ago when she was describing what was helpful in therapy. So we take the time to listen. We do not assume what people are talking about. And through conversations, we generate new collective ideas on what people want to do that are owned by the client, not by the clinician and not by the coach. So Ashley, maybe you could start a little bit in talking about what because I don't know if I fully represented what in the very beginning and talking about the grief and kind of not feeling that you're being in a place where other people think where you should be in life and living up to other people's expectations and maybe adopting those expectations as your own. So maybe you could say something about that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. So I feel like there's a lot of pressure to exist in a certain manner or to be very productive all the time, especially in this day and age. I'm not sure if that's like a digital thing or like a cultural thing. But regardless, there's a lot of pressure to constantly be producing or, making a certain amount of money, like especially right out of college or university or wherever someone's path takes them. And I had this conversation that really brought me like a lot of insight. I was on the train having a conversation with a woman who was a bit older than me, and we were just kind of sharing feelings about feeling a little bit lost and not really being entirely sure on our next steps. But we were bonding over that. And I kind of came to terms with like, maybe we're not supposed to have it figured out. Maybe there's magic in allowing things to reveal themselves to us. And maybe we don't need a set concrete path that has worked for another person before because we're all so individual and unique that we can't be prescribed a career and life path and expect it to be exactly what we want it to be.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that when you were talking, what came to my mind is that I think that, from an early age, we're asked like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or, I don't know if kids are still asked that. I know certainly they were when I was young. And so we have an idea of what we want to be. And I know that, when I went out to college, it was as the suggestion of my father what I wanted to be because, he loved me so much and wanted me to be something that I could take care of myself regardless if I was in a relationship or not in a relationship, and I was in a field that would always be a useful field. And so when I remember going to college and not even really thinking about, was this something that I wanted to do? And that was okay. I wasn't searching for something else. And I remember when I was getting my degree, there were certain areas that I could have focused on, and I just loved being able to learn. I really love the process of learning. I love the process of being in school. Maybe that's why I went to school for 12 years. I just really loved learning, but I don't know if I ever felt a pressure to have to have to make a certain amount of money. And it was probably the way I was raised. I assume, because I don't think society has changed that drastically. I think that people have always wanted to make a lot of money, but it might have been the part of the United States that I lived in, where there was kind of a lot of focus on being a good person versus the amount of money and income that you had. I mean, I remember moving here, and the first thing to ask my daughter was in school, like, what kind of car does your mom drive? And I remember thinking to myself, I cannot believe that she even got asked that question. But welcome, to where we moved. And so, but also within my parents, I had the flexibility that if I didn't like what I was doing, that they had faith and trust in me. And so about, my first degree was in nursing. I was going to become a nurse anesthetist, put people to sleep. And then a little bit later, I was going to do another type of nursing, and I ended up doing intensive care nursing and really liked it. But my first love really was psychology. I loved thinking about why people thought about things and how people change, and so I found myself, after a few years going back to school, very much welcomed by my parents, very much welcomed by my dad. So instead of my dad saying something like, "Are you crazy? You've got a good job. Why do you want to go back to school and incur more debt?" He in fact said, you know, I might have wanted to do different things in my life, and I'm so glad that you have the opportunity to do so. So I made a lot of changes without even having a very concrete plan on how I was going to do that, other than kind of having a vision of what I wanted to have, and creating that, even up to the time that I was lucky enough to meet the leaders in the field when I was a young clinician, and at first become faculty with the Eastern Galveston Institute. Later on, opening up Now I See a Person Institute, and so I had a lot of freedom in that part of my life. But one of the things that I've realized is not everybody has that freedom. And sometimes we come from situations, or we're shaped by our environment. I very much believe that, instead of thinking that that we have this internal kind of rigid shaping that we can't escape. And so when you have this freedom to think about what you want to do, the possibilities, I think I used that word before, but are endless. And I'm thinking about you, Ashley, that you came here back to the United States about, how long ago did you return here from Florence?
About 6 months ago.
About 6 months ago. So for our audience, could you kind of describe what it was like when you were in Florence as compared to the United States?
Oh gosh, it was my dream life. Um, well, it was a lot of work for sure, because I was enrolled in 3 different universities at the same time because of my uh university program. I was enrolled in my home university. I was enrolled in Accademia delle Arte, which is an Italian art school, and also was enrolled in California State University of Florence, where I was mostly taking I was mostly taking the classes in the Accademia delle Arte, which was phenomenal. I loved studying art in Florence. Everything in Italy is art, and there's just a different perspective. Life is much more slower pace. There's much more of a respect for people's time, people's energy. If you got in the way of an Italian and their coffee, it's like breaking open hell or something. Like you can't tell someone, like you can't convince someone out of their wellness practices. You can't convince someone to put their own life and their wants and their needs down to for money. It's the priorities are just extremely different out there, and I miss it very, very deeply. I would like to go back as soon as I can, but we'll see what the cards have in store for me. But yeah, I learned so much about just like how to prioritize the things that make life worth living, whether it's coffee, art, good company, good conversation. There just isn't this hustle and bustle and this like mm, hunger for money and success and power that there is in LA.
And so I remember at one point in time, you're always also talking about the difference and the field of mental wellness, right? That most people weren't in therapy. Is that correct?
Yeah, so most people like having a therapist out there was it was something that was available to the people, but it wasn't like as common as it is out here. Um, People just had a really, really strong community in which they relied on deeply. And so they talked to their people about their problems. They talked to their moms, they talked to their siblings, they talked to their friends about dating or literally anything. It was just normal coffee conversation. Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's just a different level of like openness, and
Mm-hmm.
um people weren't as afraid to confront things conversationally, um as I feel like they can. I don't want to say that people can be afraid of confronting things conversationally out here, but I it was just like they I've noticed with like the conversations I was having is people would rather say it up front really, really bluntly and then like apologize if they offended you um than not say anything at all and like let it fester and dwell,
Mm-hmm.
which I had a lot of respect for.
Mm-hmm. Also, people weren't on medication, so people just didn't do
No,
a lot of what psychiatric medication was not normal.
no, it was not normal. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was not normal at all.
Mm-hmm.
That was not
So,
something that the doctors would recommend.
so if you know, I'm just gonna kind of connect this to what happened to you recently. So it sounded like you were on this amazing train ride, and that you and another person had like this exquisite conversation um about life and about achieving kind of that place in life that you want to, and what would that look like. And it sounded like this person was a bit older than you and still had some of those concerns. So if you had been in Italy, what kind of things do you think that you would have been talking with somebody on a train ride?
I mean, I used to have plenty of conversations. Typically, like the conversations I would have on the trains with people was, I mean, I like to talk a lot about like mythology and art because
Mhm.
that's kind of my like niche passion is like I love contemporary art and abstract art and surrealism. So I could talk about that all day. And when in Italy, everybody knows art. So we could just like sometimes I would just like Google pictures of like Salvador Dali or even John Pilchuck or um, Francis Bacon, and then we would just discuss a painting for
Mhm.
like hours, which I love because that's my it's my ball game. Or even like um I being an art student out there, I was constantly studying color, shape, and form. So discussing color, shape, and form with people was more of a regular conversation as opposed to um, what are you doing with your life?
Right. So that's, yeah. So now we're going to get back to the theme that we were originally talking about. So So within I guess the constructs of where we live, because we kind of all live in a vicinity that's not too far from each other. Not that one of the states we live in is exactly the next state over, but we, are all, again, not quite too far from each other, and not far at all from each other on Zoom. But I think that there are ways that we can learn from our experience in different countries. I know when you were talking about like just having a conversation, like what's happened to us just having conversations about life and not needing to be worried about how proficient we are, you know, or families being worried about how proficient or not proficient we are, or even our partners or our friends, or I just notice sometimes in talking with people that they have this sense that they're not good enough, that whatever they're doing isn't quite, they don't have quite enough money, that maybe they aren't where they want to be in their job. Maybe the people in their jobs don't see them in the ways that they want to represent themselves. That there's always this deficiency narrative that permeates our conversations. And it's also in the media. Like, I remember at one point in time, and I don't remember what class I was taking and when this might have been, but we were talking about what would happen if the media was talking about positive things, and I think people would be like, oh, well, no one would want to listen to it. I don't know. I think people would want to listen. And I think that's why people search out podcasts, even our podcast, to listen to our stories, because with our stories of being with clients or being in coaching positions, the people that we're in conversation with, they grow to have wonderful lives, great lives, where their lives aren't permeated with worry. And so, I wish I had an answer for everybody, on how to achieve that. But I just think that it is absolutely achievable, and it doesn't have to be difficult. Just like in the same way that we're collaborative dialogical practices, and there's very little quote unquote techniques that we do. I think I talked about the not knowing position, the not yet said, something like that. It's really the crux of what we do is that we sit down and we talk with people and we have conversations that are helpful for them. They will let us know if the conversations aren't helpful. They let us know how they want things to be different, and we collectively are able to find ways to do that. And I think that's what you were talking about that was happening in Italy, right? That people would talk to their parents, talk maybe to their, you know, to if they were married, maybe they talked to their sister and brother-in-law, or their brother and sister-in-law, or who-in-laws, and just have some like normal conversations, because they're kind of normal situations that I think get infused with abnormality. So either you are free to jump in on this.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that's been said here. It resonates. I think when you were mentioning how children are asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? I don't think we realize that there's a lot of pressure behind that question.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of like allowing children to live in the present
Mm-hmm.
and be who they are in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
it forces them to think about something that they can't, they don't even have the tools to anticipate yet,
Mm-hmm.
I remember growing up thinking that I had to be, as successful as, say, my aunt, who was a district attorney for many years, or other people in my family, had to have a high-powered career. And so I felt a lot of pressure to achieve. Um, and that's not to say that I was never allowed to be, a kid, just be myself. But I think it's important to think about how that thought about deficiency, like you were mentioning, that discussion of there's constantly this like underlying assertion of deficiency. I think it can even start, way even back then when it's not intended to,
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And then how do we have peace with who we are? Because I tend to think that if we have peace about who we are, then we can grow into that person that we want to be, or that job, or change careers, but I think the sense of community is very important. And it sounds like, just on that trip on the train, that you had new thoughts that were validated by a stranger. And I just think that is so profound, that that validation for who we are can take the place in so many different settings, and we do not want to discount because it's a stranger that we might ever see again. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the validation of our journeys, I think, is super, super vital, because I mean, we're all kind of doing our best here, and we're all just, we're just we're just trying to do our best, be happy, uh, find first personal fulfillment, care for our families. Like we're all humans just trying to exist on this planet, and I think it can get really, really, really complicated really, really fast. And um I think that recognizing that, like, hey, like, you know maybe this life is just really, really high pace and fast pace, and there's a lot of expectations, and people, like, again, like, compared to other countries, like in LA specifically, like there's a lot of expectations for people to run very, very quickly, and that causes people to feel like they're inadequate. I know I personally have felt that way a lot, but how I kind of combat that is, like, remind myself, like, hey, like, I'm doing all I can, and we're all just trying our best every day, and I'm showing up, and there's a great confidence I get for showing up for myself. Um, whether it be like I'm painting every day or doing my yoga every day, I'm showing up and I'm doing the best I can. And um, yeah, I don't need to be doing 110 things at the age of 23. Like, that's so awesome for the people that can do that, but I recognize, again, the humanness of me. Like, it takes time to make your dreams a reality, and you don't have to stress out that it's not it's not here yesterday. um,
So I'm going to ask a question of Margaret. So Margaret, did you feel this way when you first graduated as well, or similar?
Um, yeah, I had certain expectations of what things would be like after I finished, and that did not pan out. And I had to somehow make myself okay with that, and I had to navigate that, and it was difficult at first. Um, but I decided to just do what I knew to be right and ethical.
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot to be said for living your life with integrity. Um, I decided that I was not going to give that up for anything, even if it meant I could maybe, make more money.
Mhm.
Um, And I'm able to, I do have peace with myself, and I am able to sleep at night. And I know that I was able to help people, and I feel very privileged and grateful for that opportunity
Mhm.
that I had to help people, even if it wasn't in the way that I originally pictured when
Mhm.
I finished school.
Mhm.
So I think there's something, I think that's very valuable, is if we are just honest with ourselves, if we live honestly.
Mhm.
And that was a big thing for me. And I think we need to not compare ourselves to other people. I think you
Mhm.
mentioned that earlier, Susan, that
Mhm.
um, if we're constantly comparing ourselves, of course we're not going to be content. You know, there's always going to be people doing things that we think are amazing or that we admire, and it's okay to admire those things, but we also have to realize that we are all different and we all have different roles in life, and that's okay. So yeah, I guess that's what I would say about that.
And what would you tell yourself?
My 23-year-old self,
You
or
would. Yes. Mhm.
that's what I would tell her. I mean, I would just say, don't worry about, having a high-powered career and being, having success in the judgment of the world, because the world doesn't necessarily value the same things you do.
Mhm.
Um, and I've come to realize that more and more. The world values power, the world values money.
Mhm.
Or I shouldn't say the world, but our world,
Mhm.
that we're living in, like Ashley was mentioning. In Italy it wasn't quite like that, but yeah, here we do see that, and it's okay to not value those things, and to have other priorities. I went into school because I wanted to help people, not because I wanted to make a ton of money and have a high powered career. And so I lived by those values instead. And I'm glad that I did. I'm glad I didn't sell out. So I would just tell my 23-year-old self to just be okay with who she is, and
Mhm.
and be true to who she is, and to be honest with who she is. That's,
Mhm.
I think, rather than trying to fit into some mold that was prefabricated.
Right. Right. And and I think these conversations are so important because, not feeling like we're fitting in, not feeling like we're being respected, not kind of having, like, as Ashley said, my people, or I guess some people call it their tribes or their support systems or their friends and families or whatever that might be. I do think we have to center ourselves around people that can support who we are as people.
Mm.
We hear about, like we always are telling people, like, that are in middle school or in high school, like, well, wait till you get to college, then you get to be around people you want to be around. But after college, those rules still apply. You get to be around people that you want to be around. Our tribe needs our people, our support systems need to be exactly that, support systems. And that doesn't mean like throwing away family members that don't support us, but we need multiple voices of support. And I think some people find that also, perhaps in therapy or life coaching or consulting or all those types of things. I would like to see people have the ability, not so much to the need to go into therapy, but the need to find that support and coaching and consultations. And that really, I think, fits with kind of tying this all in together because, that's kind of our focus for 2024 is, how do we help people before life issues get overwhelming and they do feel that maybe they have a clinical diagnosis or something like that. how do people find support systems and know that problems will get better with time, that we do not have to necessarily define ourselves with deficiency labels or narratives for things to get better. I'm just thinking about, Margaret, you've been able to do such wonderful things in your life and impacted so many people. And there's a sense of you being older than 23 of where that's very comforting. And no one could have told you at 23 that that was going to happen, but it did happen. And people are so resilient if we can support the resiliency. So for now, we're going to wrap up. I hope that everyone enjoyed this podcast. We're going to be bringing up themes on hopefully a weekly basis and talking about our view on some of these services and perhaps how people can achieve wellness. So thank you very much. This is Now I See a Person Institute. Now I See a Person Institute is a nonprofit teaching, research, and clinical institute, helping especially and preventing high acuity problems from occurring. Thank you very much.